Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures Podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we conclude our three-part series on what it's like to do a road trip during a pandemic. So as a recap, right before the pandemic hit, in the end of February, I bought a camper van spontaneously on eBay up in Vermont, flew up there 2 days later because New York was just starting to get COVID and I didn't want to be a carrier, so I flew up, drive it back down, and then it just kind of sat idle in my driveway outside, just running it every once in a while. But in the summer, when the lockdown went away, I said, I wonder what it's like to take a road trip now. And can you even take a road trip now? So I wanted to find out. So I headed out without any real general plan outside of I wanted to try to make it to Colorado. That was my main goal. And I wanted to try to meet as many of you as possible and see some friends, all socially distanced, of course, and try to be as careful as I could and not spread it. I figured that for the most part, all I was doing was getting gas and going to the grocery store. And so I could do that anywhere. And most of the time I'd be camping and in my own self-contained home, being in a van. So anyway, I decided to find out. And so off I went. And as I was preparing today's show, I have spent this whole last week packing up and moving and sorting out. And I have decided, based on that trip and my experience, that I want to see this country hardcore. And so when I got back home, I put my house on the market. After a few weeks, I had it all ready to go. I was lucky. I blessed with 7 offers in the first weekend. And so I had a nice little bidding war. So that worked out well for me. And I closed in 5 days. And instead of buying another house, I decided to put the bulk of my things in storage and hit the road in my van. And so I'll do that at least until the end of the pandemic. Or at least that's my plan. We'll see how, as we know, how plans go, but that is the plan. I'll probably just get a place this winter just to kind of chill. It's been a crazy, crazy year for all of us, and I think it'd be nice just to take a breath. But as I was packing up and moving, and I was realizing what a pain it is and how each time you do it, you say you're never going to do it again, even though I don't think my next move will be my last move. I think I've got 2 more moves made. This next one, wherever it ends up being, and then the nursing home, final assisted stage thing. At least that's the hope. But I didn't tell you a story about what happened after I left the Devil's Den State Park because it makes me look stupid. And of course, I don't like to look stupid in front of people. But I also, the more I think about it, as I was lifting all that junk this week, I was like, I still would make the same decision. So I'll let you be the judge. Was I stupid or was I kind? So I'm trying to err. I like to think I erred on the right side of that equation. So I'm in Arkansas at Devil's Den State Park, coming down the mountain, and I finally reached the interstate again. I don't know how long that took. So I'm on the interstate, maybe, 15 minutes. And it's a fairly remote area. There's not a lot of exits. And up ahead, I see pulled off on the side of the road, I see a U-Haul, and we all know what that means. So somebody's moving, and they've broken down or had some other issue. And a little bit further ahead of the U-Haul, I see somebody with a gas can. So now, all right, I got two pieces of information. I know he's already having a bad day, and he's in the middle of nowhere. So even though I've only picked up hitchhikers 3 times in my life, all stranded women, never a guy, I figure, give the guy a break. I've got the room in the van. So I pull over, and I jokingly said when I opened the door, I hope you're not an axe murderer, and let him in. And then I take a look at him. He is covered in tattoos. I mean, not just 1 or 2. I mean, his whole body is a tattoo. And he's missing 3 fingers on the left hand. So I'm like, what on earth have I done? So I'm driving this guy in my rape mobile to the nearest town, which is about 10 miles away. And as we start talking, he's a nice guy. He just looks a little scary. And he even comments, he said, I'm really glad that you picked me up. I've been waiting a long time. Nobody likes to pick up people with tattoos. And, we do sometimes make judgments, and it's not right to judge a book by its cover, but you have to make snap decisions sometimes. And anyhow, so I learned a little bit about his story about he and his wife were starting a new life in Arkansas, and they were almost there, and they just didn't make it to the next town to get the gas and all that. And he was saying again, it turns out he was a tattoo artist. And so that explained a lot of the tattoos. And he also mentioned that he was sorry he did it because people judge him all the time. He goes into a store and people follow him around thinking he's going to steal. Nobody wanted to pick him up on the road today. And so I figured by the time I got to the gas station, if he was going to do something wrong, he'd have done it by now. And since everything seemed all right, I said, listen, go get your gas. I'm going to stop at the store next door, pick up a couple items, and I'll take you back to your truck. So off we go. And as I'm in there, I was like, shoot, I forgot all about COVID. So I've got this stranger who just came from California, I think. I said, what am I doing? So I get him a mask, and I get in. I said, I forgot about COVID. Please put mask up and blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, so I dropped him off his truck, and that was my good deed of the day. Even though I was like, should I even tell anybody I did that? Because that was really stupid, and it could have ended wrong. But I do believe in my heart that most people are kind, good people. Every once in a while, you're going to be wrong, of course, but I think I gave him a little more faith in humanity, and he gave me a little more faith in humanity. Those are the kinds of things that can happen to you when you're on a road trip. So in the last episode, I was up in Missouri, and I was working my way to Colorado and Montana. But my trip was not just about adventure. I also wanted to see the country itself. I wanted to see the quirky towns and all the little attractions. And I also wanted to learn more about our history, which seems a lot more interesting to me now than it did as a kid when I was memorizing events and dates in the most boring social studies classes ever. So on my road trip, I was able to walk on the Natchez Trace. I walked on the Trail of Tears, on the Pony Express, out in Frontierland, and I got to see some really kitschy, cool roadside attractions along the iconic Route 66. So in Mississippi, for example, I walked along the historic 444-mile Natchez Trace, part of which is in Tishomingo State Park, which is named after Tishomingo, a revered Chickasaw Nation chief. The Commerce Trail runs from the Nashville area all the way down to Natchez, Mississippi, linking it up with the Mississippi River. I am fascinated to be walking the trail used for centuries by the local native peoples. This trail was later adopted by early colonists and settlers until the arrival of the steamboat moved goods down the Mississippi River a lot more efficiently. Archaeologists have found evidence of habitation in this area since 7000 BC. By the early 1800s, the Natchez Trace Highway was built and became the premier scenic highway of its day. The highway actually runs directly over the park. When I'm on one of the trails, whoop, there goes the Natchez Trace right over me. While there, I tried to hike all of its 13 miles and got most of it done, except for a couple places I didn't feel like backtracking. But there, the outcropping trail was my favorite. And I love there's so few hikers out there. On this trip, I see people sometimes at the campgrounds, but at the trails I pretty much have to myself. I met one guy, though, who was from the area and hiked there a lot. He said even the locals know a lot of the places to bushwhack where they'll see old moonshine stills, and some of the caves have some of the ancient, is it petroglyphs, the writings on the walls. And so there's just a lot of history in that area. On the Bear Creek Trail, this obviously naturally follows the creek, that you can either hike alongside or even float down if you want to. But that water's that muddy brown as it's carrying all the silt down to the Mississippi. And I had that Alan Jackson earworm song. You know, the one that goes, way down yonder on the Chattahoochee, never knew how much that muddy water meant to me. Please excuse my horrible singing voice. I love music, I just have no tone. But anyway, so that was running my brain all day as I was walking along that trail. So not only can you hike and float, I also was able to use my hybrid bike to climb the road up to Taylor Mountain. Now remember, I live at sea level, so my thighs were absolutely screaming as I rode to the top. But it was so much fun zooming back down. There are hardly any cars on the road, and I felt really safe. And this is all located within the park. But I also had the realization that if I had skidded off the road, there was ravines usually right on the side, and it would be hard to see me. And like I said, there weren't many cars anyway to see me. And I keep thinking on this trip, I said, nobody really knows where I am. So it's one of the downsides of traveling solo. And so I think I need to be more prudent about leaving something in the camper of what my intentions are. So that way, if I don't show up and the park rangers or somebody wonders how come I haven't paid my rent for the days after a couple of days or whatever, they'll at least have an idea where to go looking. So that was just as an aside. So I walked the Natchez Trace there, and then my next historic trail that I walked on was the tragic Trail of Tears. And this is one of the sadder chapters in American history. Beginning in the 1830s, white settlers wanted to grow cotton on Native American lands, and the federal government began a program to move the roughly 125,000 natives from North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida to specially designated quote-unquote Indian Territory, which is across the Mississippi River. And even though the Supreme Court said that settlers could not take away the sovereign land of the Native peoples, it was completely ignored by President Jackson. And in 1830, he advocated and had long advocated for Indian removal, quote unquote. And when he was an Army general, was absolutely brutal against the Creek Nation, trying to pretty much dispose of them. Once he became president, he signed the Indian Removal Act, which transferred the quality land of the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, Creek, and Cherokee people from much less desirable land in Oklahoma that was the country acquired from the Louisiana Purchase. Even though the law didn't allow for forcible removal, that part of the law was completely ignored. So tens of thousands of the Native people beginning with the Choctaw Nation, were forced to march, often in chains, with no food or supplies or support of the government, over to Oklahoma. And thousands died along the way. A Choctaw chief told an Alabama newspaper that it was a trail of tears and death, and the name stuck. The Trail of Tears is over 5,000 miles long and covers 9 states: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Today, the National Historic Trail is run by the National Park Service, and portions are accessible on foot, by horse, by bicycle, or by car. I walked part of the Trail of Tears in Village Creek State Park, which is just across the Mississippi River in Arkansas, maybe 50 miles west of Memphis. This is a pretty and well-run park. It's filled with beautiful rocks and a tragic past. The interpretive signs along the Trail of Tears haunt me. On one section of the trail, the path has sunk down from the sides at least 4 feet. So you're walking along this straight ravine surrounded by mature trees, and their roots are clinging down over the sides, holding on for dear life. And I'm wondering as I'm walking, are these indentations of the land due to the 100,000 people forced to march it? It really sent chills down my spine. I only see one other person along the trail. We politely nod, but I think neither of us feel chatty on this somber land. I learned that the soil in these parts does not rest on bedrock, so it's really, really erosive. That confirms in my mind why that ravine was so straight and so deep. The soil along the sides of the ravine remind me of Swiss cheese. As the trail enters Arkansas, the bogs and the swamps that the people encountered were ruthless and swallowed both the people and the horses in many cases. As I later head west into Oklahoma, I relearn in more graphic detail than I was taught in school that we didn't keep the resettlement land unmolested forever as we had promised. That in fact, as settlers moved westward, Indian country, quote unquote, continued to shrink and was virtually obliterated in 1907 when Oklahoma became a state. At Village Creek State Park, they also have a short but informative botanical walk that identifies trees and plants and how they were used by the local people for medicines and other uses. In addition to 6 dedicated hiking trails, there are 25 miles of multi-use trails for bikers and horses. In fact, there's a separate horse campground at the park, complete with stables. And if you don't want to camp, they have some really nice cabins that also include TVs, which I say yuck to that if you're out in the woods. I like to be out in the woods, but for those that want it, they do have a TV. If I go back, I'm going to try to time it for the spring wildflower walk or the fall foliage weekend, and sometimes even have musical performances. So it's a pretty cool park. I would put that in the list if you happen to be in the area. Changing emotional temperatures instead of walking the Trail of Tears, my next dose of history is getting my kicks on the iconic Route 66. Growing up, I still remember that song. Get your kicks on Route 66 or something of that nature. I even read there's a television series about it. So Route 66, also known as the Main Street of America, is one of America's original highways, completed in 1926. It originally ran from Chicago down through Missouri, and I first meet up with in Joplin, Missouri, over to Kansas, down to Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona before it finally ends up in Santa Monica, California. Nowadays, interstates have bypassed all the little towns that were dotted along this historic road and was officially removed even as a highway in 1985, causing the decline of businesses in many of these smaller towns. Yet some of the kitschy attractions remain, and a drive along the historic route reveals quaint small-town Americana and often some really cool murals reflecting its proud past. One of my favorite attractions is the Big Blue Whale just outside of Tulsa in Katosa. Hugh Davis built this massive whale in a spring-filled pond as a surprise anniversary gift for his wife, who collected whales. Unlike many Route 66 attractions, this was meant for private family use, but people kept stopping by to check it out, so Hugh brought in a bunch of sand and set up picnic tables. He hired lifeguards and allowed the public to come play. Swimming is no longer allowed, but you'll still see folks tossing a line in the pond. Due to COVID, I didn't enter the hollowed-out cavity that makes up the Big Blue Whale's belly, but the families visiting sure seem to be enjoying themselves, and you just can't help but smile when you look at this monstrosity of delight. This was my first time in Oklahoma, and so looking at research to this show, I read that the reservations were gone, but I drove through some in Oklahoma, so they're not completely gone, or else they move things. I don't know the details on that, but what I did like is a lot of the reservations I saw in Oklahoma looked a lot better than the ones I was familiar with further west. But I did see a lot of really, I don't know a nice way to say this, but some truly depressing towns that looked like they were on their last legs, and they seemed to be too far gone for too long to be due to COVID lockdowns and all that. It was like some towns had this systemic depression that you just wonder what makes people want to stay in these dying towns. But one cool guy decided not to let his town die, and his name is Jim Reindeers. And I gotta love a guy with a great sense of humor and a clever idea. So this guy Jim once worked in England, and he knew Stonehenge, the big rock monuments. He knew these very well. And so he decided, as a memorial to his father and as a tourist attraction to his beloved town of Alliance, Nebraska, with a current population of around 8,000, so he decided in 1987 to replicate the current dilapidated stage of Stonehenge. So Jim decides on a new medium for his sculpture, cars. This offered several advantages. They're about the same size as the Stonehenge rocks. Non-working cars are readily available, and the wheels, even if they had to be towed, would help the building process immensely. Originally, the attraction included 25 cars, and these were erected during a reindeer family reunion in a mere 6 days. Built in time to dedicate on the summer solstice of 1987. Says Jim, "We were able to reduce the time of the original Stonehenge construction by 9,999 years and 51 weeks. You gotta love this guy. With 39 dead cars arranged in roughly 100-foot circle, with the parts welded together or half sunk in the soil to make a foundation, and then painted them all a dull stone gray. They make a great comic reproduction of Stonehenge. I drove an hour and a half out of my way to go see it, and I was glad that I did. If you want to see it, you're going to have to also drive that far out of your way because there's nothing but flat, often treeless land surrounding it. You've got to see it if you're anywhere near the area. It's a hoot. And I believe because of his Stonehenge knockoff, Alliance seemed to be prospering, unlike a lot of the towns I saw. So kudos to you, Jim, and kudos to the community for saving their town. Of course, you're going to see photos on the website. Heading north, I drove along parts of the Pony Express. The Pony Express was a mail, message, and newspaper delivery service that used a relay of horse-mounted riders in the early 1860s. While it went bankrupt in just 18 months, it reduced the time for messages to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast to just 10 days, and it was a critical communication system that proved that transcontinental communication services could indeed be developed. It was replaced by the telegraph, but remains a romanticized part of the frontier lore of the American West. I loved learning about frontier history as I journeyed west. Driving across the vast plains, I can't imagine the hardships endured by those settling into the wild, wild west, and I haven't even hit the Rockies. I do learn that there's truth to the winds come sweeping down the plains, just like the song in Oklahoma. And then there's times I feel like I need to grip Sophie's wheel just a little tighter, even though I don't feel like I'm ever losing control. She's a tall van, so I do feel the gusts. I'm really not used to seeing so few trees, or towns, gas stations. I've been trying to fill up when I get down to around half a tank so I don't have to worry about it. But one day I start getting a little twitchy. It's been well over an hour. I'm driving looking for a gas station, and there's no towns along the state road I selected to travel on. And now I'm down to about a quarter tank, and still I'm in the middle of nowhere. Finally, up ahead I see a small gas station, and when I get there it has a sign saying, "Call this number, we'll come out and let you get gas." Whatever. The two riders that I've been leapfrogging their vehicle off and on for the last couple of hours have already beat me to the station. They said they called and the guy can't come out, but there's another gas station a couple miles up the road, and he points me at the intersection in the southerly direction. So grateful, off I go. I'm out, and this is even more desolate. This road is smaller than the state road I was on, and it's miles and miles of nothingness. There's not even a building, a shed, nothing. It's just prairie land. And so after about 5 miles, I wonder if these guys have pranked me. And I'm not on fumes, but I don't like my gas gauge at all. And of course, like everywhere else, I have no cell service. And so I can't call AAA if I run out of gas, and I don't see any cars. So I decide I'm going to return back to the abandoned gas station, continue on in the direction I was going, because I knew nothing was back at least 100 miles the last way. And happily, about 2 miles up in the direction I was heading was the gas station that I was supposed to be going to. The guys that got the message from the owner had just mistaken which way he was supposed to go. So now I have a new rule. When I'm out west or in desolate areas, I'm going to fill up whenever it drops a quarter tank. I did not like that at all, and that's not going to happen again. My more immediate goal is to head towards South Dakota, and it's one of the few states I haven't yet been to. I want to see Mount Rushmore, I want to see Crazy Horse, I want to visit Badlands National Park. Even though my parents didn't like Badlands, I think I'm going to appreciate the stark landscape more than I think they will. But I don't know, I want to see for myself. As I approach the Black Hills, I'm once again entering forest. Yippee! Trees and shade are back. And we got some hills again. My first stop is Wind Cave National Park, but sadly the caves are closed. I was thinking it was due to either COVID closing the park or terrible diseases that are killing our bats, but when I get cell service, I learn that they're doing some major repairs on the elevator, so they're closed. A little bad on the timing, but I imagine I'm going to go up in this area one day and explore when it's not quite as hot as you'll find out this trip has been as I continue on. And at least for right now, I'm enjoying this pleasant change of landscape from the vast prairies I've been driving through. I appreciate the grasslands, though, and I like the way that they bend with the breeze, and it does get a little breezy. But I am traveling in August now. It's been really sunny and really, really hot. And Sophie's front window is massive, so I don't care if I got the air conditioning on. That sun is just blasting in. And I think I find trees soothing. You know, I just feel more at home there. So I'm liking these Black Hills, and I'm enjoying heading up the mountain. My next stop is Custer State Park, and I'm blessed to find a herd of bison just munching right by the road. These beasts are huge, and one mama's got her calf, and she's eyeing me suspiciously about 20 feet away. Even in my car, that gal could do some damage. And remember, if you listen to my Adventure Travel Show podcast, that the wildlife safety rule is hold your hand in a fist with your thumb pointing up, kind of like you're hitching a ride, except straight up. And then put your thumb in front of the animal that you're looking at. And you should be able to, with your arms stretched out, you should cover that animal with your thumb. If you can see any parts of the animal around the thumb, you're too close. So doing this with Mama Bison, there's a big blob outside my thumb. So technically I was way, way too close. And you're a little safe in a car, but that, like I said, that bison could do some damage. So if I saw her getting a little twitchy, I would take off ashore, and I was ready to gas it if I had to. And I was able to sit there, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, and nary a car came by. I had the whole place to myself. It's hard to believe that almost 60 million buffalo used to roam the continent until the massive slaughter and the introduction of cow diseases caused the population to drop down to 514 in 1889. Fortunately, conservation efforts saved them from extinction, and now they number around 31,000. The further into the Black Hills I go, I notice not just an increase in motor vehicle traffic, but a disproportionate increase in motorcycle traffic. At first, I figured they must really enjoy riding these dramatic winding hills. Around lunchtime, I see a creek with a picnic table, so I pull over to make lunch and just a chance to relax, get out of the car and get out of the van and watch the pretty creek and chill out for a little bit. And I'm also able to look at the road while I'm sitting there. And now I could see, it's not just because I'm not seeing a whole lot of traffic, period. But when I'm standing still and watching the traffic go by me, I see it's not just a lot of motorcycles. It's like 20 or maybe even 40 motorcycles for every car that goes by. Something's going on. I don't really know anything about the cycle culture, and I have no cell service, so I can't Google it to find out. But I figure soon enough I'll figure it out. So after lunch, I continue up towards Crazy Horse. That's the memorial to Crazy Horse that's being built. And you can get a pretty good glimpse from the road. And I decided, I think that's all I need for this. So I'm just going to head up to Mount Rushmore. And now I'm getting a little bit more civilization. There's motorcycles everywhere. So I get to Mount Rushmore, and you pull in. You get a ticket for your parking, and it's free, but you got to pay $10 parking or whatever it is. So you get the parking ticket, don't pay anything yet, and you continue on, and there's people there directing you. And so I pull in, and so it's not like backed up cars trying to get in. So I don't really realize at this moment that this is a really bad idea, Kit. You should not be doing this. I don't know this yet. So I pull in, the guy directs me to the left, and some of the motorcycles are going forward. He sends them go forward. And so I go in the parking garage, and then I'm working my way towards the entrance, and there's construction going on. So they're kind of corralling me into this parking lot that they're directing the motorcycles to. I'm like, oh my God, the parking lot is bumper to bumper motorcycles. And I'm like, okay. And I see an array of people in some of the most dramatic attire that would ordinarily make this the best people watching on the planet. But again, this is the season of COVID, so I'm not real comfortable that I'm around all these people. But I'm outside. I said, just go. If you get uncomfortable, you can leave. I'm already here. Who knows if I ever get out here again? So I'll just keep my distance and do what I can. I'm like the only person. No, I won't say the only person. I'm one of maybe the 20% that are wearing a mask. Certainly one of the few that's socially distancing. And so anyway, so I make it inside and to the viewing area. And I said, there are bikers everywhere. And everybody's in a party mood. I mean, it's like Christmas. I mean, everybody's in grand spirits. They're smiling, happy, and high-fiving, having a grand old time. And I poked my head into the indoor exhibit area. I was like, that's too crowded. I just zipped through. I said, I don't want to stop and look at anything because it's too close to all these people. And I did poke my head into the movie theater. And I was like, I can sit in here and watch the movie because not a lot of people were there and I could spread out. So I was like, I'll do that and then getting out of this building. So that's what I did. And then I wanted to go see, you do that, then it's time to go actually see the carvings. So I step outside, and on the side of the mountain are these massive 60-foot carvings, as you know, of Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt. But the upper viewing area was really crowded, and I see some stairs. So I walk down those, and nobody's down the lower level, and it's shady too, so it's got 2 bonus points for me. So I looked, and I'm just really uncomfortable with all these people. So I told myself, not a good idea. You saw it, but you better go. So I take off. Unfortunately, you have to wait in the line to go to the little machine to pay your parking ticket before you leave, and you give them your verified ticket as you exit. But of course, the machine's not working right, so it's taking forever, and the line's getting longer and longer, and we're getting a little tighter because there's not a lot of room. And so I asked the guy ahead of me, who was obviously a biker, as I was probably the only non-biker in the line, is there like a motorcycle convention going on or something? And he laughs. He says, that's the 80th year anniversary of the Sturgis rally. So I learned now it's not a conference, it's a rally when they all get together. And so the whole area, people come from all over the country. And they said, it's not an environment I know anything about. So I was completely clueless about it. And I managed to be in South Dakota, the head of the Sturgis rally, at the week of Sturgis. This is a massive gathering of people. They estimated upwards of 500,000 people, and most of which, I'm ashamed to say, were not taking any precautions. There's reports of it being a super spreader situation. You go to the Sturgis website now, and they're saying, no, they blew up, whatever it is. All I know is I wasn't comfortable, and as a traveler, I didn't want to be responsible for carrying it. So I'm all the way up there. I wanted to see it. I just didn't get out of my car. So I drove to Sturgis. I drove to Deadwood and just did a drive-through. But like I said, it was Party City, and the streets were filled with people, and it looked like a lot of fun. And like I said, if it weren't for COVID, you could sit there and just people watch and be fascinated all day long. I'd have been entertained for days. But it was just really, really crowded, and I was uncomfortable. So I said, all right, scrap this. I'm going to Badlands. It's about an hour and a half away. So it was a little late in the day, but I said, there's too many people around here. Off I go. I'll be better off camping. So I head out, and as I get closer to Badlands, and I'm tired, I don't like driving all day, and I've been sitting in the car a lot today. So I see a sign saying Badlands, this way was 30 miles, and if I take a right, it's only 20 miles. Well, shoot, even though, and I'm smart enough when I was in Rapid City to take advantage of having cell service, putting Badlands Park into my phone so I could use it offline. And so my phone's telling me to go straight, but I was like, I'm going to take this one to the right, save 10 miles. And so I turn, and right after the turn, there's this little dusty town that if you picture a ghost town, that's this town. It's 2 blocks of just dilapidated old Western buildings. It's kind of cool looking, but also sad cool in a way. So I passed the dusty little town, and then I'm out in, again, I thought I was in the middle of nowhere before. That wasn't the middle of nowhere. Now I'm really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's nothing, no cars, no nothing, not a telephone pole, nothing. And as I continue on, I start seeing the rock formations and the landscape formations that make up Badlands, which is a really stark and rugged landscape. And I continue on, and up ahead, like I said, I haven't seen a car since I made this detour. Now they're coming or going. It's just me. And I've been driving, I'm going to guess 20 miles, maybe 30. I don't know. It was a long way. There's a roadblock. Not a building, just people blocking cars. And I had just been reading Paul Thoreau's On the Plain of Snakes, where he takes a road trip along the Mexican border and talks about roadblocks by bandits. I was like, oh boy, am I about to have a South Dakota highway robbery? But I don't know what else to do, so stupid me, whatever. I pull forward, take the window down a crack, and at least I see it's a woman. She's not in uniform, she's in civilian clothes, but she's got a clipboard. I was like, well, that kind of looks official. So I'm a little less apprehensive, but still, I'm not really 100% comfortable with this situation. And so she says, what is your business? I said, I'm trying to go to Badlands National Park. She said, it's closed. I said, closed? She said, no, yeah, you're in Lakota Nation. I did remember seeing a sign for that I was entering Lakota Nation. And we're not allowing any visitors due to COVID. You have to turn around. So as tired as I was, back to Rapid City I went. And you know what I forgot? Sturgis. You know what Sturgis and all those people mean? No hotel rooms. I was like, all right, well, maybe I can find a place to just park Sophie and just sleep in there. But it was like 100 degrees. It was so hot and no shade, no trees. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And then I see a KOA. That's the new name for Campgrounds of America. And I said, well, maybe I'll go in there. There's a lady, I think it was the CEO, had done a keynote at one of the travel conferences. And she showed some pictures of KOAs. I was like, well, those look like resorts. That looks pretty nice. And unfortunately, this wasn't one of that kind. This was, you're crammed in like sardines. But they had 2 spots available. And I took one that was next to a hedge, like a border hedge. that at least offered a tiny bit of shade. And I was grateful, even though they charged about 3 or 4 times more than normal because of Sturgis. I was glad to have a place to park. And it had a very clean bathroom, the nicest bathroom, I think, in the whole trip. But it was not my cup of tea. You literally, I exaggerate, could reach out and touch somebody, touch your neighbor and shake hands. And it was not my cup of tea. So there's no way I was staying any more than the one night. I was getting the heck out of there. Didn't even explore Rapid City. Like that whole area, I'll just do it another day. It was just way, way, way too crowded. I don't want to be around all those people. So I decide, by the morning, I'm like, I'm going to get as far away from this whole Sturgis rally as I can. So I'm going to head west. I'm going to bypass North Dakota, which I'd planned to see. It was one of the other states I haven't been to. But it was so hot. And the map looks like they didn't have trees either. At least not in the western part of the state. So I decided I'm going to go to Wyoming. And so I'm driving through the Thunder Basin National Grasslands. They're beautiful, but again, no trees. And I'm like, I got to find some shade pronto. I see a big lake on the map, and so my mind, lakes, you have trees, and you sit under the trees with a nice cold drink and read a book and look at the water and all that. So I'm heading to this massive reservoir, make a detour to go do so, and I find in my distress that it too has no shades. Nobody's planting any trees, or else they don't get enough water for. I don't know. I don't know this part of the country at all. And they have campgrounds, but it's all so exposed. I was like, I know I'm going to roast trying to sleep tonight. I'm not going to be able to sleep. So I decided to make a U-turn, head back to the interstate, and I'm going to continue west, and maybe I can find a hotel and get out of the heat somehow. And by this time, I am just sick of driving, and I'm sick of the heat. I'm sick of the blazing sun. That was one of the down parts of my trip. Can you tell? And I decide I'm going to just stay at the first hotel I find. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care if it's a flea-ridden thing. I'm just staying there as long as they have air conditioning. And I know I coulda, shoulda, woulda taken the detour to go see Devil's Tower, which is a massive 867-foot butte. It's beautiful and the nation's first national monument. But in this heat, there was a 0% chance I was going to climb it. So I say, screw it, and continue on my hunt to find a hotel. It's going to be there the next time I come this way, and I do want to go back up there. I'm just not going to do it in the middle of August heat. No way. But I'm in a pretty remote area, and it's a long time before I do find a resting place. And I'm very grateful to find a place that I can sleep with some air conditioning that night and not be roasting. Even if my screen porch, I'd still be roasting. It was just too hot. And Sophie would have been, I'd been in a sauna. So looking at my map, I see that I'm not too far from Bighorn National Forest. That's located in northern Wyoming and still a fair ways from the Continental Divide. So I'm starting to get, kind of close to the mountains. And it's maybe like 80 miles from the Montana border. It's separated from the Rocky Mountains by the Bighorn Basin. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to head to Bighorn. And as the road is winding its way to Bighorn, I see I am going up. And in the distance, I can see mountains, like real mountains, tall mountains. And as I get closer, it's like, wait a second. Is that snow? Hallelujah. If there's permafrost in the mountain, that means I'm finally going to find a place to cool off. So I race to it like it's an oasis in the desert, and I truly feel like it is. I have been revived. In the cute town of Sheridan, I stop at the forest ranger's office and pick up a rather intimidating map. And this forest is ginormous, with over 1 million acres. The map has a few main roads and what looks to be hundreds of small little spurs. Probably all dirt, but it's got a gazillion little roads in there. And I could see how it'd be super easy to get lost, even on the roads. And if you don't have cell service, it'd be kind of hard to figure out your way back because it's just all little forks throughout the whole park. I tell the ranger that I want to find a place near a pretty trail, and so he directs me up to the Circle Campground, and so off I go. I consider myself a pretty good map reader, but like I said, I was very intimidated by this map. It's just all gray spurs with numbers, and I don't see a rhyme or reason or a pattern to the numbers, and it takes me a while to get my head wrapped around how to read this map. Like I said, it's just loaded with numbers, and at some of the junctions I come to, I'm not 100% sure if the quote-unquote main road I'm on is still the main road, or is it this junction, as long as they're all paved. It was sometimes confusing. And it wasn't until I finally came to one intersection that had a pull-off right next to it that had the labeled intersection that I could pull in, catch my breath, look and see and find exactly where I was in the map. And I did see that one of the forks I'd made the wrong choice. But one thing I am pretty good about doing when I'm not familiar with my situation is I always want to try to be able to find my way back to my starting point. I'll do this on trails as well as in this car in this instance, is I'll pay, I'm on hyper alert of all my surroundings so that I'll remember where I've been. But also when I make a decision point at a fork, I'll look in my side mirror to see what does it look like going the other way. So if I have to turn around or if I turn around, I'll recognize, oh, I'm supposed to go right here. Oh, I'm supposed to go left here. And so that gives me a little bit more confidence to venture where I don't have GPS. So I figure out where I am, figure out how many turns and what to do. I can count the intersections now because I'm down from 1,000,000 spurs down to maybe 5 or 6. So I was like, go 2 lefts and 1 right and all that. So I finally make my way to the campground, only to be told, I just rented the last spot. So it looks like tonight I'm going to be boondocking in the Bighorn National Forest. And boondocking, if you're not familiar with it, is when you can camp for free. It's available in many, if not most, national forests, the Bureau of Land Management. You might know it as BLM land. And at many Walmart and Cabela's in their parking lots, you just got to ask permission first there. And usually boondocking, except of course if you're in a parking lot, you're off the grid and you're not going to have any amenities like toilets or bathhouses. Sometimes you'll hear it called wild camping or dry camping because you generally will have no access to water, electricity, or sewer. Boondocking on publicly managed land is a great and free way to explore the U.S., and I'm going to do a whole episode on this on the Adventure Travel Show podcast in the coming year. So if you want to learn more about it, make sure you subscribe so that way you don't miss it. So driving up, I decided, all right, I'm going to try to find a boondocking site that's close to that trail I want to hike. The rules are you have to be off the road because people got to be able to use the road, but not parked right next to the road. You got to be off it, usually multiple feet. I think it's like 200 feet or something like that. I'll put that in the episode when I do some more homework on all the rules. So the idea is to get off the road but not trample the good vegetation. And so eureka! Up ahead, I spot a site that's maybe 300 feet off a spur on flat land, right where the trees begin. So it was like almost like a cleared field, little minor grasses and all that. And so I could tuck Sophie into the trees. I could pull out my pop-up porch. I got my little table, my folding chair, and I am just happy. I've got this gorgeous view of the surrounding summits. The temperature is divine. I mean, this is the coolest I have felt outside in a month, maybe. Long time. Maybe most of the trip. And so I'm really excited to explore in the morning. I get up early, get an early start, and the trailhead's pretty close by, maybe only a 15-minute walk uphill. And I see even here, I'm lucky too, they have composting toilets at the trailhead. And so I make a mental note of that because that's unexpectedly convenient. Like when I'm boondocking, that means I only have the woods or my bucket. So, and I try to, in the more pristine areas where possible, to not, and when there's lots of people, and there are going to be lots of people right off these roads, to, if possible, pack out stuff. Particularly in areas that don't get a lot of rain, that can help clean up the soil. I learned that on my Idaho river rafting trip. So on my walk, I'm heading up the mountain. It's a rocky trail, so I would recommend bringing your sticks. And I realized I'm a little bit short of breath, much more than I should be for the exertion that I'm doing. And so I tell myself, this whole last week, I've really been in the van a lot, done a lot of driving, a lot more than I have in most of this trip. So I'll just kind of blow it off. And the rest of the day, that was just my main hike for the day. I got home or back to the campsite and just kind of relaxed. It was uneventful, just read. And I was just thoroughly enjoying the peace and the tranquility of the mountains. And I especially loved not being so hot. You can usually boondock on public lands for up to 2 weeks, and I decided I might just do that. I am very happy here. This is my kind of place. I love the beauty, and I love the privacy of my campsite. However, the next day, A beat-up car pulls in about 50 feet from me, and a young man pops out. He's camping solo. I think it's odd, in 6 weeks, he's the first solo camper besides myself I've seen. I also realize that I'm pretty vulnerable here. There is no one around. Not a soul knows where I am, only that I'm somewhere in these 1.1 million acres. Maybe that forest ranger would remember me and where he's trying to send me. Maybe he wouldn't. Who knows? And if I ran into trouble, no one could hear me scream. And did I mention once, twice, maybe 100 times during this show? I have no cell service when I'm out in the Tules. So my antenna goes up when the man approaches me. He's a fit young man in what looks to be around his 20s. But he politely asked for permission to camp so close to me. And so my guard comes back down again. He's like 100% of all the people I've ever met in the woods. He's a nice person, and I relax. Turns out he's just graduated and is heading to the Pacific Coast to start his new job. We chat for a while, and then he returns to set up his site. After being momentarily alarmed, I now can't decide, am I glad that he's a nice person camping near me? Or am I annoyed that someone has invaded my secret corner of the Bighorn Mountains? I decide it's both. I also decide, just in case I misjudge this young man, I'm going to sleep in Sophie with the doors locked tonight. Gratefully, and at last, it's cool enough with just the 2 skylights and the vent fan on. I hiked a little bit more that second day, but spent the bulk of the day reading. I'd forgotten how much I love to read just for the pleasure of a good story instead of for educational purposes. And I hope to make time to retain this habit when I get back home. And that's going to happen sooner than I expected. That night, something very odd happened. Now, I consider myself pretty fit and a very healthy person. I only seem to get weird things whenever I do get sick, but that's very rare, and I generally only go to the doctors for checkups. I hardly ever even get a cold or the sniffles. A few months ago, as I was preparing for the sale of my business, definitely up there as one of the most stressful projects I've ever slugged through. I could tell that my normally low blood pressure and heart rate was elevated. It went back to normal after closing the sale of my business, but I'd packed that arm blood pressure monitor on this trip as a just-in-case item and had it up by my mattress. I didn't use it the whole trip, but I woke up in the middle of the night on that second night in the Bighorns with my heart racing and my body feeling under tremendous pressure, like my upper chest was going to explode. Was I having a heart attack? Did I have COVID? I didn't know what. I didn't think I had a bad dream that would make my heart do what it was doing. I was like, oh, thank God I have the blood pressure machine. So I grab it, and I put the cuff on, and I'm shocked at the reading. My systolic pressure was over 170, and my diastolic pressure, if I'm saying that right, was over 100. I'm normally right at normal. I'm no doctor, but I knew from my mom's high blood pressure, this was bad. So throughout the night, I'd wake up, go back to sleep, wake up, go back to sleep. I kept checking it. Still bad, bad, bad. There were almost all the readings were over 170. They're all terrible. These are like stroke-like levels of high blood pressure, and for inexplicable to me. So at daylight, I decided I'm going to head back down the mountains, return to Sheridan, and go to an urgent care center to see if they can figure out what's going on. And I walk in. Of course, I look perfectly normal. I tell the receptionist I'm having some really weird spikes in my blood pressure. And fortunately, there's not very much wait at all before I'm ushered in. The nurse listens to my story, checks my blood pressure, and then gets the doctor right away. So I said it was high. So they immediately do some lab work. And during the lab work, we find out I flunked a potassium test. And that level's way too high. And that could indicate kidney failure. I'm like, what the heck is going on? I'm so healthy. This is ridiculous. And I've been, hiking for 6 weeks, no problem. Why all of a sudden is my whole body collapsing on me? But the odd thing, too, is that was the second bad kidney test I had this year. The first one I just kind of blew off as a fluke. Bad reading, I was dehydrated, but not, because that was what the test came back is. Your blood levels, of whatever it was, is high, and this either indicates kidney failure or you're dehydrated. So I'm going to check box number 2. And I wasn't worried about it. I figured next time I got the blood work, we'll find out. Because I had no indication of any illness whatsoever. But now I got a second kidney issue, so now I'm alarmed. And then the doctor who was first extremely concerned about the blood pressure, has now changed his concern to the kidney. And so he puts me on blood pressure pills, the diuretic for the potassium thing, and tells me to come back on Monday. This is a Saturday. And we're going to do the test again and see how the medications are working and whether it was a bad reading on the potassium, blah, blah, blah. So I decide, okay, I'm not going to be without cell service while we figure out what's the situation. So I'm a little stressed about all this, which I'm sure is not helping the blood pressure. Get the pills, and I decide to treat myself to a nice little suite at Comfort Suites. And I've got this beautiful room overlooking Sheridan, and it was just very, very nice. And it was a comfortable room, air conditioning, nice desk. I could work, I could do some research, I could do some writing, all that kind of things. And I was trying to figure out, what the heck do I do? You know, this is COVID. I'm 2,000 miles from home. I'm 2,000 miles from family, who would be the only ones I would ask to take care of me. I don't want to be a pain to, if something is seriously wrong and I have to go to a hospital, I don't want to take up a bed that a COVID patient needs. So I decide, with a regret and a heavy heart, that I'm going to go home. Fortunately, the Monday test showed the potassium levels had gotten back in the normal range, and the pills had brought my blood pressure from a dangerous level down to a simply high level. Still not great, but it was a marked improvement that I wasn't going to have a stroke anytime soon, at least according to the readings. So I said, okay, that's it. I'd check out, and I was like, I'm just going to go home. I don't know what else to do. So I'm sorry I didn't get to see. I was supposed to see Els in Montana. I was supposed to see Venti in Wyoming. I had half a dozen of my Active Travel Adventures listeners I was planning to see in Colorado. And just sadly, I just had to contact everybody and said, I can't do it this time. I got to figure out what the heck is going on. Something is wacky is going on with my body. So even though it took me 6 weeks to make it out west, I pretty much drove like a drone getting back home. Just like 500, 600, 700 miles a day. I made it home in no time. Looking back on this whole thing with this blood pressure, I think I had a funny reaction to the altitude, which you may have heard me mention before. I've never really been good at altitude unless I train with this breathing thing ahead of time. And at Bighorn, I was camping at around 10,000 foot elevation, and I live at sea level. So I abruptly had changed my body from, I think it was like 4,000 or 5,000 in Sheridan up the mountains, and I just don't think my body adapted properly. That being said, I've been home 2 months, and my blood pressure is only normal now because I take pills. So the altitude's not the only puzzle piece. And I'm continuing to monitor things. It's certainly a controllable disease. It's just very odd. And I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or if I just took on too many major projects and the stresses of this year are taking a toll. I mean, if I look back on the year, I bought Sophie my camper van, which she's changed my life. Like you, I've been trying to protect myself and loved ones and others from COVID, which has been one of the oddest experiences I can say for almost all of our lifetimes. Then my mother died. I sold my business. And in 5 days, I'm selling the house I'm sitting in right now, and I'm moving into Sophie van. And just even the planning, the logistics of moving into a van, it's a lot more complicated than you would think. I mean, I'm not going to be here for tax season next year, so I had to get all that stuff taken care of ahead of time. I had to figure out what to do with my belongings. I put them in 5 groups. Is it coming on the van with me? Am I putting climate-controlled storage? Am I putting it in regular storage? Am I donating it, or am I tossing it? And where is the cutoff line? How long do I think I'm going to be living as a vagabond? I have no idea. So is my stuff worth storing at all? The sentimental stuff, for sure. But a lot of stuff is just regular household junk. But all those $5, $10, $20 add up. So to thousands and thousands of dollars. So I figured the way I came out with it was, if I'm gone 3 years with the stuff I stored, I think it's a fair trade. But if I decide after 6 months or a year that this is going to be longer than that, I'm going to go back and look at my boxes labeled A, B, C, or D, and I'm doing triage. I also had to store it in the unit so that if there's something I might conceivably need to access in the next couple of years, I could get to it. So it's just a lot of planning. And just in case I have a health issue I'm not aware of, or something, I have an accident, who knows what, I made sure I've got all my affairs in order and everything. I'm as organized on that as I have ever been. In fact, my letter of instruction, I consider my masterpiece of what to do. If I go, people will know exactly what to do, where to go, what to close. I'm very proud of that. But it's just been a lot for 1 year. And looking back as we close out the year, I didn't reach any of my 2020 goals, which weren't big. There's only like 4 of them. I was going to do 2 major European trips. I was going to redo the Active Travel Adventures website, and I wanted to fine-tune the production of this podcast, because doing all this with the accoutrements that come with it, the website and the travel planners, just takes a lot of time. And I got to figure out a way to scale that back a little bit so I do a good job on the show, or as good a job as I can, but still have time to do the adventures that I want to do. I'm 60 now. I turned 60 last month, and I feel my mortality. So I have a lot of things I want to do before I go, particularly before I get sick. So those were the things I wanted to do. So I'm thinking for the rest of the year, I'm going to visit my siblings before I head down south. I'm going to go now look for the heat. I was wishing I was not in the heat during the summer, but I like the warmth. I don't like to be cold. So I'm going to probably head down to the Gulf, and maybe I'll grab a condo, look at the water for a couple of months, maybe do the website, and just take a breath. It's just been a long time. It's been a long year, a good year for me. Surprisingly, I know a lot of people have had a really crappy year, but this has been a good year, and I'm thrilled. I sold my business. I'm thrilled to be officially retired outside of the podcast, and I'm looking forward to seeing what 2021 is going to bring, because 2020 completely blew out of the water any of my expectations of what the year would look like, for good and for worse. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to my Sophie Diaries in these last 3 episodes. I sure had fun reliving most of the things that happened. And I looked back fondly at my notes and my photos, and it's funny the things you forget until you get triggered by something that I had jotted down a note or I had snapped a picture of. And remember, you can go to the activetraveladventures.com website and see lots of photos of this and all the adventures that we cover on the show. And when I come back in 2 weeks, we are going to continue in the United States, but not with me. I'm bringing back Arliss. You'll remember her from that really fun interview about Baja and Mexico during the Day of the Dead celebration, which ironically occurs this week. And she's going to tell us about exploring and adventuring in Big Bend National Park, which maybe I'll get a chance to go there this winter. We'll see. I appreciate you taking your time to listen to the program, and I appreciate your support. And one way to show your support is to tell your adventurous friends about the podcast. That is the number one way people find out about new shows, is when you recommend them. So please consider recommending the Active Travel Adventures and the Adventure Travel Show podcast, my companion podcast. I want to give a shout out to Will Millard 29, who wrote a review this summer. Not my best review. In fact, it's my worst review. A 2-star titled Amateur Podcast. While informative, there are many times she goes off topic and needs to work on pronunciation. Says anyhow, a lot being all caps. Well, Wilmar 29, I totally agree with my pronunciation issues. I don't know how much I'll be able to correct that, but I will certainly work on that. And I was not aware of the anyhow, so I appreciate you calling that to my attention, and I appreciate you taking the time to do a review, even if it wasn't my best one. Thank you, and I thank you for listening. I also wasn't aware that I would go off topic, so I'm going to pay more attention to that. I do appreciate, truly, that you took the time to write a review, because that I need feedback. I need to know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. So please email me if it's bad. I would prefer the 2-star as an email and a 5-star as a review. But either way, communicate with me. Let me know. I want to hear from you. I appreciate it. Again, my email is kit@activetraveladventures.com. And please do email me. I love getting your emails. Usually, not always. No, I take that back. Every single time, they make my day. Again, I appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Stay safe and adventure on.